After 10 years of building the family restaurant into a local gem, I walked into the annual meeting, expecting to receive gratitude. But instead I saw my younger brother, fresh from his MBA degree and years abroad, standing in my chairperson position. My parents beamed as they announced he would be the new CEO. And me? After a decade of sacrifice, they told me I could continue as head chef. In that moment, I realized I hadn't built a family legacy at all. I had laid the foundation for my brother to seize, and what happened next made my parents pay dearly for their blind favoritism. My name is Theodore Garnett, but everyone usually calls me Theo. I was born into a family where the smell of food was always at the center of everything. Seattle, Washington, the city of drizzles and coffee, is where we grew up, and my family owns the Garnett's Table restaurant chain, a name that has become familiar to anyone who loves local cuisine. From the early days, it wasn't just a business, it was flesh and blood, a legacy that my grandfather had built with sweat from a small eatery by the bay. My grandfather used to say that each dish is a story, and the restaurant is where those stories are told through taste. But for me, from a young age, it was a heavy burden. I remember vividly those rainy afternoons in Seattle when I was just 8 years old, sitting in the corner of the main restaurant's kitchen watching my grandfather stir the seafood soup with his calloused hands. He smiled kindly and said, "Theo, you have to learn to see things through to the end, whether you like it or not. In this life, nothing comes easy." At the time, I didn't fully understand his words, but they etched into me like a scar. My parents, Mr. and Mrs. Garnett, were different. They weren't the type to dream about cuisine like my grandfather. For them, Garnett's Table was a money-making machine, and I, the eldest son, was the first cog that had to turn. From childhood, I dreamed of entirely different things. Technology, that was my true passion. I loved sitting for hours in front of the old computer in my bedroom, writing simple code to create small games or drawing architectural designs for skyscrapers that I imagined would change Seattle's skyline. I dreamed of MIT or Stanford, where I could study software or design. But my parents had other plans. "You're the eldest. You have to carry the family," my father often said, his voice stern like a command. "Your younger brother is still small. Let him study something more prestigious. As for you, you have to go into the kitchen, learn cooking to manage the restaurant later." The pressure started from there, like a Seattle rain that never stops. I remember when I was 16, after graduating high school with excellent grades in math and science, I secretly applied to a technology university. I waited anxiously for the acceptance letter, my heart pounding every time the doorbell rang. But my parents found out. They called me into the living room where the smell of coffee mixed with my father's cigarette smoke made the air stifling. "Who do you think you are, Theo?" my mother shouted, her eyes red with anger. "Our family lives off this restaurant. Your grandfather sacrificed his whole life to build it. You can't abandon it." My father was quieter, but his gaze was like a knife. "The eldest does the heavy work. The youngest will lead. That's the rule from ancient times." Rule, that word sounded like a curse. My younger brother Benjamin, or Ben, 4 years younger than me, was always favored. He was born as the golden child. Ben was smart, quick-witted, but in a different way. He liked reading business books, dreaming of Wall Street and big deals. From a young age, my parents spoiled him, buying expensive toys, sending him to the best private schools. And me? I had to wake up at the crack of dawn to help in the kitchen, wash dishes, learn how to chop vegetables evenly. "You have to go to the Culinary Institute of America," my father declared when I was 18. "That's the best place for you to learn the chef's trade. Later, you'll take over Garnett's Table." I protested, of course. I cried, I argued, I even ran away from home for one night, wandering along the Puget Sound shore in the freezing rain. But in the end, I gave in. Why? Because of my grandfather. He had passed away when I was 15, and before he died, he held my hand. "Whatever you do, see it through to the end, Theo. Don't give up halfway." Those words haunted me. So I set off to the Culinary Institute of America in New York, thousands of miles from home. Those years were hell. I hated the smell of grease clinging to my skin, hated the sizzle of hot pans, hated standing for hours to learn how to make the perfect dish. I missed home, missed Seattle with its foggy afternoons, but more than anything, I missed my buried dream. Every night, lying in the dorm bed, I asked myself, why do I have to sacrifice? Why does Ben get to be free? While I struggled with kitchen knives and recipes, Ben was sent to study in prestigious places. He attended the London Business School, one of the world's top MBA programs. My parents bragged everywhere. Our Ben will be a big entrepreneur. They sent him money for studies, fun, travel around Europe, internships at major consulting firms. And me? I graduated from culinary with good grades, not because I truly loved cooking, but because I wanted to live by my grandfather's philosophy. Whatever you do it thoroughly. Returning to Seattle after 4 years, I stepped into Garnett's table like a soldier returning to the battlefield. At that time, the restaurant had only 3 branches, with sluggish revenue due to fierce competition from big chains. My parents told me, manage the kitchen, make it better. The family pressure didn't stop there. At every family dinner, my parents would compare. Ben sent a letter. He's working for an investment firm in London. And you? How was the kitchen today? My mother asked, her voice full of pride for Ben. I swallowed hard, telling them about the new dishes I experimented with, but they just nodded. Good, keep it up. Whenever Ben video called home, showing off his achievements, my parents would laugh joyfully. I sat there, feeling like an outsider in my own family. I started to doubt, was I born just to be a backdrop for my younger brother? Seattle in the 2010s was not easy. Competition in the culinary industry was fiercer than ever. Large restaurant chains like Olive Garden or Cheesecake Factory were popping up everywhere, attracting customers with cheap prices and uniform menus. Garnett's table, with its 3 branches in downtown Capitol Hill and Fremont, was struggling. Revenue fluctuated erratically, employees lacked cohesion, and my parents were busy with vague plans about expanding the brand. They looked at me, their eyes filled with both expectation and imposition. You have to do better. This restaurant is the family legacy. I started from the main kitchen at the downtown branch, which had once been my grandfather's pride. The kitchen was messy, the equipment outdated, and the team of chefs worked in a whatever-works style. I remember the first night standing in the kitchen, the stifling smell of grease rising up, the sizzle of pans seeming to drown out every thought. I hated it, the feeling of being tied to a place where I didn't belong. But then I looked up at the photo of my grandfather hanging on the wall, his kind smile and hands holding a wooden ladle. I gripped the kitchen knife tightly, telling myself, if I have to do it, I'll do it the best I can. I set about making changes. First was the processes. I spent hours rewriting the kitchen operations, from ingredient storage to staff rotation. I discarded outdated recipes, dishes that customers had grown tired of. I wandered through Pike Place Market in the early mornings when the fog still blanketed everything to meet local fishermen and farmers. I want the freshest shrimp, salmon caught just this morning, I told them, and gradually they trusted me. I built relationships with organic vegetable growers in the Skagit Valley, selecting each bunch of kale, each potato still caked with soil. I wanted Garnett's table's menu not just to be delicious, but to tell the story of Seattle, of the sea, of the land and sky. I created new dishes, seafood soup with lobster and clams from Puget Sound, served with crispy toasted sourdough bread. I experimented with pan-seared salmon steak with lemon butter sauce garnished with fresh dill. Customers started to take notice. One evening, an elderly couple sitting at a corner table called me out to thank me. This soup reminds me of the days I used to go out to sea with my father. You've done a great job. Thank you for the meal. I smiled, but inside it stung. I was doing it out of duty, not passion. Gradually, I became more than just a chef. I became a manager. I trained the staff, from the novice waitress to the lazy sous chef. I taught them how to smile at customers, how to tell the story behind each dish. Customers don't just eat, they experience, I said, repeating my grandfather's words. I optimized costs, negotiating with suppliers for better prices without sacrificing quality. I even taught myself Excel to track revenue, every number a drop of my sweat. Over 5 years, Garnett's table changed. Revenue increased by 20%, then 30%. Loyal customers returned, bringing friends. Articles in the Seattle Times began mentioning us. Garnett's Table, Seattle's culinary gem. I was proud, though that joy was always tinged with bitterness. Every time the press praised us, my parents would only say, "Good job. But you have to try harder, don't get arrogant." Meanwhile, Ben from London sent emails about his investment consulting work, lavish parties, and my parents beamed. Ben will take the restaurant to an international level. I remember one evening after a long shift, I sat alone in the kitchen polishing my favorite knife, a gift left by my grandfather. I was tired, but not from the work. I was tired from the feeling of invisibility. I had turned Garnett's Table into a proud brand, but to my parents, I was just the talented chef. They didn't see the nights I stayed up balancing budgets, the early mornings I drove to the port to inspect seafood. They only saw Ben with his MBA and promises of big vision. Once I tried talking to my mother. "Mom, I've done everything for the restaurant. I think I could get involved in strategy, expanding to new branches." She looked at me, her eyes both sympathetic and distant. "You're only good in the kitchen. Leave the business and market development to Ben. He'll come back to help us soon." I stayed silent, swallowing the lump in my throat. I wanted to scream that I wasn't just a chef, that I was the one keeping Garnett's Table alive. But I didn't say it. I went back to the kitchen, the only place where I was respected. Success came, but it wasn't as sweet as I imagined. I began living in contradiction. I loved what I had created, cherished the staff like family, and the customers' laughter was a huge encouragement. But I hated the price I paid. I had given up my dream of technology. I sacrificed friendships, love. The rare dates always ended when the other person realized I had no time. "You're really busy, aren't you?" they asked, and I could only nod. Busy because of Garnett's Table, busy because of family. But I didn't give up. I pushed myself to the limit, not for my parents, but for myself. I wanted to prove that even if forced, I could still excel. I built a loyal team. Maria, the waitress with the radiant smile, who always knew how to make me laugh after a stressful shift. Tom, the restaurant manager, who saw me as a brother. And the others, from reception to dishwashers, all believed in my vision. They didn't just work. They lived with me in every dish. The pinnacle of success came in the 8th year. We signed a contract with the Westin Hotel Seattle, a $1.5 million project to provide menus for major events. I negotiated it myself, convincing them with a slow-roasted salmon with herb sauce that took me months to perfect. When the contract was signed, I thought I had achieved the impossible. I called my father. "Dad, we have the contract with Westin." He only said, "Good. Maintain the quality." Not a single word of praise. I began to realize that no matter what I did, I was still just the chef. 10 years passed, and Garnett's Table became an icon of Seattle. Tourists sought it out, booking tables months in advance. Suppliers called me by nickname, the keeper of the ocean's soul. I smiled, but that smile grew heavier each day. I had succeeded, but not for myself. I succeeded to set the stage for Ben, who was about to return with his innovative plans. I overheard my parents whispering about how Ben would take the restaurant to new heights. I wondered, what new heights? I've done it all, haven't I? And then that fateful day arrived. The day Ben returned from the United Kingdom with his gleaming MBA in hand. I was standing in the main kitchen of Garnett's Table, holding a sharp knife, chopping fresh dill with a rhythm as steady as a heartbeat. The smell of seafood from the simmering soup filled the air, mingling with the damp chill of Seattle seeping through the window. Then I heard a clatter. the sound of a suitcase rolling on the sidewalk. Through the foggy glass, I saw Ben's tall, lean figure dressed in a fitted black suit stepping out of a taxi. His smile, confident to the point of near arrogance, made me pause. Monica, kneading dough beside me, whispered, "Is that your brother? He looks like a cologne ad model." I gave a faint smile, saying nothing, but inside a storm was brewing. Ben was back, and I knew everything I had built was on the brink. Ben pushed open the door, bringing with him the chill of Seattle's rain. "Theo, bro," he called out, wrapping me in a tight hug before I could react. I patted his shoulder, feeling the stiffness in the embrace. "Long time, Ben," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. But when I looked into his eyes, I didn't see the little boy who used to follow me on the beach, fishing rod in hand. Instead, there was Benjamin Garnett, 29 years old, brimming with confidence, armed with an MBA and experience from London's big corporations. He had the look of someone who knew he'd take control of everything. "The restaurant looks decent," he said, scanning the kitchen with an appraising eye. "But I think we can do a lot better." I tightened my grip on the knife, trying to suppress the unease creeping up. That night, our family gathered in the private dining room on the second floor of the main restaurant. The old oak table where my grandfather used to sit and tell stories about the early days of the business now became a stage for my parents. My father, with his silver hair and commanding voice, stood up, raising a glass of wine. "Today is a special day," he began, his eyes gleaming. "Ben has returned, bringing experience from London, England. We've decided that Ben will be the new CEO of Garnett's Table." My mother nodded, adding with a radiant smile, "He has big visions. We're going to expand, take Garnett's Table global." I sat there, clutching the edge of the table, feeling like the floor was collapsing beneath me. CEO? I had dedicated 10 years since graduating from the Culinary Institute with a prestigious degree to turning Garnett's Table into a Seattle icon. I had built the team, optimized the kitchen, secured a $1 million contract with the Westin Hotel. And now Ben, who had never set foot in the kitchen, never spoken to the fishermen at Pike Place Market, was being handed the reins. What about me? I heard my voice, dry and hoarse, cutting through the air. My father looked at me, his gaze unwavering. "You'll continue as head chef. That's where you shine." My mother chimed in, her voice soft but sharp as a blade. "You're the heart of the kitchen. Ben is the lifeblood of the company." I looked at Ben, hoping for a hint of hesitation, a trace of guilt, but he just nodded, his confident smile unshaken. "Big bro, I'll need your support. We're a team, right?" A team? The word felt like an insult. I stood up, left the room, and stepped out into the freezing rain. Seattle's wind whipped my face, but it wasn't as cold as my heart. I drove along Puget Sound, the city lights blurring in the rain. 10 years of sacrifice, 10 years of sweat and tears, only to hear my mother say, "You're the heart of the kitchen." As if I were just hired help. The next morning, Ben called the first meeting with the management team. I sat at the end of the table next to Tom, the restaurant manager who had been with me from the start. Ben stood in front of a whiteboard, laptop open, presenting his vision with slick PowerPoint slides. "Garnett's Table needs to scale up," he said, his voice brimming with enthusiasm. "We'll cut costs, standardize the menu, and shift to a fast casual model. Think Starbucks, but for restaurants." I furrowed my brow. Fast casual? Garnett's Table was a place where customers lingered for hours, savoring the seafood soup I meticulously crafted, listening to stories about fishermen catching lobsters. It wasn't a place for fried fish sandwiches. I spoke up, trying to keep my tone calm. "Ben, the current menu is our soul. Customers love it because it's tied to Seattle, to local ingredients." Ben smiled, a polite but cold smile. "That's outdated thinking. We need to scale. We need bigger profits. Customers want fast, convenient, cheap." I wanted to argue, but my father cut in. "Listen to Ben. He knows what he's doing." The room fell silent. Monica, sitting across from me, gave me a worried look. Tom lightly touched my shoulder as if to say, "Hold it together." Ben moved fast, like a storm. He signed contracts with large suppliers providing frozen seafood and imported vegetables at lower costs. "We don't need fresh shrimp from the bay anymore," Ben declared in a kitchen meeting. "Frozen ingredients will cut costs by 40%. I was stunned. What about quality? Customers will notice if the soup loses its natural sweetness. Ben shrugged. "Theo, customers aren't that discerning. They want cheap and fast." I looked at him, unable to believe this was my brother. The same boy who used to eat our grandfather's toasted bread and beg for more. The weeks that followed were hell. Ben scrapped the pan-seared scallops with orange and hazelnut sauce, a dish that took me months to perfect, to replace it with a quick combo. A fried fish sandwich, frozen fries, and a large soda. "Easy to produce, easy to scale," Ben said. I argued, but every time my parents took his side. "Focus on the kitchen," my mother said, her tone commanding. "Business is Ben's job." I felt like everything was being stripped away, not just my authority, but the heart I had poured into Garnett's table. Customers started complaining. One evening, Mr. Henry, a regular from my grandfather's days, pulled me aside. "Son, the salmon tonight wasn't right. It's bland, missing the soul it used to have." I apologized, explaining we were testing new suppliers, but inside I was burning. I confronted Ben, trying to stay calm. "Ben, customers aren't happy. We need to go back to the old suppliers." He cut me off. "You're too conservative. This is the trend. Don't you see how successful McDonald's or Taco Bell are?" I turned away, the weight of helplessness crushing me. It didn't stop there. Ben terminated contracts with the local suppliers I had built relationships with over 10 years. Martha, the organic vegetable farmer from Skagit, called me, her voice heavy with sadness. "Theo, I heard Garnett's table doesn't need my produce anymore. Did I do something wrong?" I didn't know how to respond, only apologizing and promising to find a way. But what could I do when Ben held all the power? Each day I walked into the kitchen with a heavy heart. I still cooked, still led the team, but the joy was gone. Monica noticed. One night, as we cleaned up after a shift, she said, "Chef, you're not smiling like you used to. What's wrong?" I wanted to spill everything about my parents' favoritism, about Ben destroying what I had built, but I just shook my head. "I'm fine, Monica, just tired." Then one day, Ben called me into the office, the room where I used to sit to plan and balance budgets. He sat behind the desk, typing on his laptop, and said, "I need you to focus on the kitchen. Stop interfering with strategy. I have big plans." I looked at him, feeling like I was staring at a stranger. "Big plans?" I asked, my voice cold as ice. "Like ditching fresh ingredients for frozen, or replacing signature dishes with cheap combos?" Ben laughed, but it wasn't my brother's laugh. "You don't understand business, Theo. Leave it to me. Just focus on cooking well." I left the office, my heart filled with rage. I started thinking about leaving, but every time I looked at my team, Monica, Tom, the people who had been through so much with me, I hesitated. I thought of the customers who called my name when they walked in. I thought of my grandfather who taught me not to give up. But deep down, I knew my limit was near. That night I drove to the bay, as I always did when I needed to think. The rain fell heavily, the city lights blurred. I thought about the past 10 years, about what I had built and what Ben was tearing down. I thought about my parents, their blind favoritism. I gripped the steering wheel, telling myself, I can't keep going like this. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew I needed to reclaim myself. Not Garnett's table, but Theodore Garnett. The days that followed, I moved through the kitchen like a machine. I chopped vegetables, stirred pots of soup, checked the freshness of salmon, but each motion felt drained of soul. Monica noticed. Tom noticed too. They cared, they asked, but I only nodded, forcing a strained smile. Inside, I was like a fire snuffed out, leaving only smoldering smoke. Ben, with his fast casual vision, was turning Garnett's table into something unrecognizable. I tried to stay calm, to fulfill my role as head chef, but each day was a fresh cut to my pride. Ben kept imposing changes. He terminated more contracts with local suppliers, replacing them with companies providing frozen ingredients from afar. Joe, the fisherman who had supplied lobsters since my grandfather's time, called me, his voice trembling. "I don't understand. What did I do wrong for you to drop me?" I apologized, promised to find a way, but deep down I knew I was powerless. Ben held all the control, and my parents blindly believed he was the future. Then came the final straw, like a last stab of a knife. The contract with the Westin Hotel Seattle, the $1.5 million deal I had spent months negotiating, was my greatest pride. I remembered the early morning sitting with Westin's culinary director presenting the menu. Slow-roasted salmon with herb sauce, pan-seared scallops, and an apple tart dessert with cinnamon ice cream. They were convinced, not just by the food, but by the story I told, of Seattle, of fishermen, of local farmers. When the contract was signed, I thought, this is proof. Proof that I'm more than just a chef. But one afternoon, Ben called me into the office. He sat behind the desk, flipping through his laptop, his voice casual. "I reviewed the Westin contract. It's not feasible." I frowned. "Not feasible? We already signed it, Ben. They want a high-end menu and I'll deliver it." Ben shrugged. "Your menu is too expensive. Fresh lobster, scallops, high costs, low profits." I proposed a new menu. Fried fish combos and fries like the fast casual branches. I was stunned, feeling like I'd been slapped. "Ben, this is our biggest contract. The hotel wants quality, not fast food." He looked at me, his gaze cold. "Theo, you don't understand business." "I've spoken to Westin. They agreed to try the new menu." I wanted to scream, but I only clenched my fists. "Ben, they signed because of my menu, because of the quality. If you lower the standards, they'll cancel." Ben smirked. "You handle the kitchen. I'll handle this." I left the office, my heart crushed. I knew what would happen, but I didn't expect it to come so fast. 2 weeks later, Westin sent an email. I was checking ingredients in the kitchen when Tom ran in, his face pale. "Theo, Westin canceled the contract." I read the email, each word piercing my heart. "We are disappointed with the menu change. The quality does not meet the hotel's expectations." I confronted Ben, trying to stay calm. "Ben, I told you. They wanted high quality, not cheap combos." But he didn't take responsibility. Instead, he turned on me, his voice full of blame. "Theo, if you'd done your job as head chef properly, the new menu would have worked. It's because your cooking wasn't good enough that Westin canceled. You're lucky I'm not penalizing you." I stood there, frozen. Not good enough? Me, who had spent 10 years ensuring every shrimp, every potato was perfect. I looked at Ben, then at my parents sitting at the dining table. "Dad, Mom, this contract was my life's work. Ben ruined it and now he's blaming me." My mother sighed. "Don't make a big deal out of it. Ben's trying. You need to support your brother." My father nodded. "You're the chef. You should have done better." I felt the blood rush to my head. 10 years of sacrifice, 10 years of sweat, and this is how they treated me? That night, I stayed late at the restaurant, sitting alone in the dark kitchen. I held the chef's knife, my grandfather's gift, and watched its blade glint under the light. I thought about the early days when I still dreamed of technology, of skyscrapers. I thought about my grandfather who taught me not to give up. But now I realized I wasn't giving up, but I couldn't keep living for others. I had given Garnett's table everything, and they had taken it all. I stood up, opened my locker, and took out my knife set. I wrapped them carefully, like wrapping a piece of my soul. Then I called Monica, Tom, and a few trusted staff, those who had been with me from the start. "I have to leave," I said, my voice calm but resolute. Monica was stunned. "Leave where? You can't abandon us." I looked at her, my gaze steady. "I'm not abandoning you. I'm taking back my life. Whoever wants to come with me, stand up. We'll build a new legacy, one we create for passion, not profit." Tom nodded without hesitation. "I'm with you." Monica paused, then grabbed my hand. "I'm in too." The next morning, I sent a resignation email to my parents and Ben. It was short, just one line. I've done enough for Garnett's table. Now I'm doing for myself. I left the restaurant carrying my knives and my loyal friends. As I stepped outside, Seattle's rain was still falling, but this time I didn't feel cold. I felt free. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew I wouldn't let anyone take my worth away again. The days that followed felt like wandering through Seattle's fog, not because of the rain or wind, but because of the emptiness mixed with excitement. I had left Garnett's table where I'd poured 10 years of my life, but I didn't yet know what came next. I returned to my small apartment in Belltown with its single bed, a desk piled with papers, and an old photo of my grandfather smiling kindly beside a pot of seafood soup. I sat there staring at my carefully packed knife set, asking myself, what do I do now? But then my grandfather's voice echoed in my mind. See it through to the end. I knew I couldn't stop. I had to build something, not for my parents, not for Ben, but for myself. I started by calling Monica and Tom. Are you sure you want to follow me? I asked, my voice tinged with hesitation. I had nothing but ideas and a small amount of savings. Tom, with his usual resolute tone, replied, Theo, you gave us faith. Now it's our turn. Monica laughed. If you didn't call, I'd be mad. We're family, aren't we? Lisa, Miguel, and Ethan, the veteran waitress, the dishwasher, and the intern, agreed to join too. They weren't just employees, they were the ones who had seen me pour my sweat, tears, and dreams into Garnett's table. They believed in me, and that reignited my fire. But ideas were easy. Execution was hard. I needed a space, a place to start. I spent a week driving around Seattle, from Fremont to Ballard, then Capitol Hill, searching for the right location. My budget was tight, and the nice spots downtown were exorbitant. One rainy afternoon, I stopped in Capitol Hill, a vibrant neighborhood filled with small bars, coffee shops, and young people walking under colorful umbrellas. I saw a crooked for lease sign hanging in front of an old building. The paint was peeling, the glass windows clouded with dust, but something about the place made me pause. I stood there, feeling a spark ignite within me. Standing in front of that small space in Capitol Hill, I felt a new breeze. Not the icy wind of Puget Sound, but something warm, like a fire just kindled. The rundown building, with its peeling paint and murky windows, wasn't the kind of place anyone would choose to start a dream. But to me, it was everything. I looked at the crooked for lease sign and imagined a new name. Hearth and Honor. Hearth for the passion I'd buried for too long, honor for the values I refused to lose. I told myself, I can do this, I have to make it happen. But that excitement quickly faced harsh reality. The space in Capitol Hill was cheaper than downtown Seattle, but it was still a major investment. I was nearly out of savings after 10 years at Garnett's table. Most of my earnings had gone into improving the restaurant, from buying new equipment to helping staff through tough times. I stood in my small apartment, staring at a pile of bills on the table, wondering, how will I manage? But then I thought of my grandfather, who had started from nothing with a small eatery by the sea. I picked up the phone and called Joe, the lobster fisherman, and Martha, the vegetable farmer from Skagit Valley. Joe, Martha, I said, my voice trembling with nerves. I'm opening a new restaurant. I want to work with you both like the old days. Fresh lobster, organic vegetables. Everything that made Garnett's table special. There was a long pause on the line. Then Joe chuckled. Theo, I knew you'd do something big. I'm in, Martha agreed too. You need vegetables? I'll grow them for you. You're the one who truly understands our value. Their words fueled my fire. Not just them, but other suppliers, fishermen from Pike Place, the local bakery, were ready to work with me again. You're the keeper of the ocean's soul, one said. I smiled, and this time it was genuine, not forced. The biggest hurdle was capital. I needed money to lease the space, renovate, buy equipment, and pay the team in the early months. I didn't want a bank loan, high interest, and too much risk. Instead, I reached out to Naomi Hayes, a local investor and former Garnett's Table regular. I remembered her sitting at the corner table, savoring my pan-seared scallops and praising them endlessly. I arranged to meet her at a small coffee shop in Capitol Hill, bringing a business plan I'd written over 3 sleepless nights. "Naomi," I began, my voice slightly shaky. "I know this is crazy, but I want to open a new restaurant, Hearth and Honor. It won't be like Garnett's Table now. It'll be a place that celebrates local ingredients, where customers feel the story in every dish." Naomi sipped her coffee, eyeing me sharply. "Theo, I know you're talented, but you just left Garnett's Table, Seattle's biggest brand. Why should I invest in you?" I took a deep breath and told her about my 10 years, how I'd built Garnett's Table from 3 struggling branches into an icon, how Ben had dismantled my work. I shared my dream, not just to cook, but to create a place where people felt at home. Finally, I said, "I can't promise instant profits, but I promise quality and honor." Naomi was silent for a moment, then nodded. "I believe in you. I'll invest $200,000, but I want 20% equity and a seat on the board." I agreed, knowing it was a steep price. But I needed her, and more importantly, she believed in me, something my parents never did. With that money, we began. The Capitol Hill space was small, with room for only 20 tables, but I wanted it cozy, not ostentatious. Tom and I painted the walls ourselves, choosing a warm gray like Seattle's fog. Monica helped design an open kitchen so customers could see us cook. Not just the food, but the passion. Lisa suggested placing small potted plants on the tables for a homely feel. Miguel, though just a dishwasher, chimed in. "Theo, go with wooden floors. It'll make customers feel at home." I smiled, realizing this team wasn't just staff, they were family. We worked day and night. I stayed up until 2 a.m., perfecting the menu, focusing on seasonal ingredients. I chose seafood soup as the centerpiece, not Ben's frozen version, but a rich, soulful soup with fresh lobster from Joe and clams from the bay. I added slow-roasted salmon with lemon butter sauce, garnished with dill, and a simple yet refined dessert, vanilla pudding with strawberry jam from a Skagit farm. Each dish was a story, a piece of Seattle. Opening day arrived, a drizzly evening in Capitol Hill. I stood in front of Hearth and Honor, looking at the wooden sign, a gift from Tom. The team stood behind me, nervous but excited. We invited a small group of Garnett's Table regulars and a few local food bloggers. I cooked the first dish myself, seafood soup, and as I served it, I told the story of Joe, fishing in the morning fog. The customers listened, then took their first spoonful. Helen, a Garnett's Table regular, smiled. "This is the soup I remember." A young blogger with green hair posted on Instagram. "Hearth and Honor, where food tells stories. Seattle, get ready." But not everything went smoothly. The first week's revenue was lower than expected. Capitol Hill was competitive, with dozens of restaurants nearby. Some nights we had only a handful of customers, and I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, wondering if I'd made a mistake leaving Garnett's Table. Monica sensed my worry. One morning, she pulled me aside in the kitchen. "Theo, I know you're stressed, but you're smiling more now. We'll make it." Her words were like a gust rekindling my fire. I started reaching out to old customers, inviting them to try Hearth and Honor. I emailed food critics, inviting them to experience it. Slowly, word spread. A local food blog called Hearth and Honor, Seattle's new breeze. Customers grew, tables were booked in advance. Joe and Martha came to eat, bringing their families. "You make me proud," Joe said, clapping my shoulder. I smiled, my eyes stinging. I trained the team differently. I didn't just teach them to cook or serve, I taught them belief. "We're family," I said at a team meeting. "Every dish, every smile tells customers they matter." Lisa, once shy, now confidently shared dish stories with guests. Miguel, the dishwasher, started learning to bake with Monica. Ethan, the intern, became my right-hand man. They didn't just work, they lived my dream with me. A month after opening, Naomi came to check in. She sat at the corner table, ordered the salmon and pudding. After the meal, she called me over. "Theo, I don't regret investing in you. This place has soul." I nodded, feeling like I'd passed a test. But I knew this was just the beginning. Hearth and Honor was mine, but it was also the teams, the customers, the people who believed in me. I stood in the kitchen watching the fire burn in the oven, and for the first time in 10 years, I felt truly alive. One afternoon, as I was checking ingredients in the kitchen, Lisa rushed in, her face pale. "Boss, your parents and Ben, they're outside." I took a deep breath and stepped out. My parents stood in the middle of the restaurant, looking around with scrutinizing eyes. Ben, in a pristine suit, smirked. Cute little place. More like a coffee shop than a restaurant. My mother chimed in, her voice sweet but sharp. "Theo, are you sure you want to do this? Garnett's table is expanding and you're choosing this tiny corner?" My father was blunt. "You'll fail in 6 months. We're planning a fast casual branch across the street. Cheaper prices, customers will choose us." Ben laughed. "Big bro, you can't compete with Garnett's table." I clenched my fists but didn't let them see me waver. "Dad, Mom, Ben," I said calmly, "Hearth and Honor doesn't compete on price. We compete on quality, on stories. My customers come because they feel the heart in the food." Ben scoffed. "Heart doesn't pay the bills." I looked him in the eye. "We'll see." They left, leaving a heavy atmosphere. Monica grabbed my hand. "Boss, don't let them shake you." I nodded, my resolve ironclad. I believed in my mantra, quality and honor would win. Hearth and Honor was my home, and I would defend it. I stood in the middle of the restaurant, addressing the entire staff and the customers present that day, with a resounding declaration. We're not just selling food. We're building a family, a place where people feel loved. Garnett's table may open dozens of fast casual branches, but they'll never build a family. My voice was firm, unwavering. The room fell silent for a moment, then erupted in applause. I began implementing my own strategy, not reliant on dry numbers or scale-up plans like Ben's. First, I focused on local ingredients and seasonal menus. Next was the menu for Hearth and Honor. It wasn't long or filled with countless options, but I ensured every dish told a story. The seafood soup, with lobster from Joe and clams from Puget Sound, was the soul of the restaurant. I included slow-roasted salmon with lemon butter sauce, garnished with fresh dill, and a simple yet refined dessert, vanilla pudding with strawberry jam from Martha's farm. I changed the menu monthly based on the seasons. Summer zucchini one month, wild mushrooms in the fall. Customers loved the freshness, but more than that, they loved how we told stories. Lisa, now brimming with confidence, stood at tables sharing the journey of a shrimp from Puget Sound to their plate. "It's not just soup," she'd say. "It's the fisherman's sweat, our love." I wanted Hearth and Honor to be an experience, not just a place to eat. I kept the kitchen open, letting customers see the flames flare, hear the sizzle of pans, and smell the aroma of baking bread. One evening, a young couple sitting near the kitchen watched Monica and me work. "I've never seen a restaurant like this," the man said. "It feels like home." That was the moment I knew I was on the right path. But then I heard Ben was following through on his threat. A new fast casual Garnett's Table branch opened just 2 blocks from Hearth and Honor. Its bright sign advertised $10 seafood combos. I stood outside my restaurant, watching curious crowds drift toward Ben's branch. Monica was worried. "Boss, they'll steal our customers." I patted her shoulder. "They might steal customers with price, but they can't steal loyalty. We do things differently." I decided to host a small event, Seattle Night, inviting guests to experience a special menu featuring local ingredients. I cooked roasted salmon with a summer raspberry sauce, and Lisa shared the story of the farm that provided the raspberries. The event was packed, and a local food critic wrote, "Hearth and Honor is proof that quality always trumps quantity." I pinned the article to the kitchen wall as a reminder. I was on the right path. As Hearth and Honor began to find its footing, I started hearing rumors about Garnett's Table. Ben's new fast casual branches were popping up quickly. Bellevue, Fremont, even near Capitol Hill. But they weren't living up to expectations. I didn't seek out the news, but it came to me like waves lapping at the Puget Sound shore. One morning, Joe called, "Theo, have you heard? The new Garnett's Table in Fremont is a ghost town. Customers are complaining the food's bland." I frowned, not wanting to believe my grandfather's legacy was crumbling so fast. But the truth couldn't be hidden. Reviews on Yelp and Google started appearing like knife cuts to Garnett's Table's reputation. The fried fish was greasy, soulless, one customer wrote. "This used to be my favorite restaurant, now it's just cheap fast food," another commented. Reading those words, I felt a mix of regret and anger. I had spent 10 years building that brand, but Ben, with his vision, was tearing it down. One evening, Lisa rushed into the kitchen, phone in hand. "Theo, read this." It was an article in the Seattle Times titled "Garnett's Table, From Culinary Star to Mediocre Fast Food Chain." The piece detailed the changes under Ben's leadership: simplified menus, low-quality ingredients, and loyal customers turning away. Garnett's Table was once a Seattle icon, but now it's just a failed fast casual chain, the author wrote. I read it, my heart heavy. I didn't rejoice at seeing the family legacy collapse, but I wasn't surprised either. Old customers began flocking to Hearth and Honor. One evening, Carl, who had once called my salmon a work of art, walked in. "Theo, I'm done with Garnett's Table," he said. "They let me down. But here I've found that old feeling again." His words soothed a wound in me. Gradually, former Garnett's Table staff came too. A young chef who had worked under me applied for a job. "Theo, I can't stand Ben's way of doing things. I want to work with you." I welcomed him to the team, feeling like I was rebuilding a family. Ben didn't stop. He opened more branches, but each one faced issues. Major contracts with hotels and companies were canceled due to inconsistent quality. My parents grew anxious. Once my mother called, "Theo, could you help a little?" Ben's struggling. I paused, then replied, "Mom, I tried for 10 years. Now I'm focused on Hearth and Honor." I hung up, feeling a mix of relief and a pang of pain. Garnett's Table began closing branches. The Fremont location shut down after just 3 months. Ben appeared in the press trying to justify it. "We're restructuring to meet market demands." But everyone could see he was sinking. I didn't gloat. I was just sad. Sad for my grandfather's legacy, for the days I poured sweat into the kitchen, now reduced to ashes under Ben's hands. Meanwhile, Hearth and Honor grew busier. An article in Bon Appetit called us "the new gem replacing Garnett's Table." I stood in the kitchen watching my team at work. Monica stirring soup, Lisa sharing stories with customers, Miguel baking bread, and felt I had reclaimed myself. Ben might have his MBA and big vision, but I had quality, honor, and a team that was like family. That was something he'd never understand. Then, a rare opportunity arrived on a rainy morning when I received an email from the organizers of the Seattle Food and Wine Festival, the city's biggest culinary event. They invited Hearth and Honor to participate alongside dozens of other restaurants, including Garnett's Table. I read the email, my heart pounding. This wasn't just a chance for Hearth and Honor to shine. It was a direct confrontation with Ben, with Garnett's Table, and with my past. I called the team for a meeting. "We've been invited to the Seattle Food and Wine Festival," I said, my voice brimming with excitement. "This is a big stage, and we're going to show them who Hearth and Honor is." Monica clapped, Tom nodded, and Ethan cheered. "We're gonna blow them away." Only Lisa seemed nervous. "Theo, Garnett's Table is participating too. They're still a big name." I smiled. "They have a name, but we have a soul, and soul will win." We dove into preparations. I designed a special festival menu, our signature seafood soup, slow-roasted salmon with an autumn raspberry sauce, and a new dish, an apple tart with cinnamon ice cream, using apples from Skagit Farms. Each dish carried the essence of Seattle, from ingredients to presentation. I worked with Joe to secure the freshest lobster, with Martha for the ripest apples. We practiced every night, ensuring perfection. Customers don't just taste the food, I told the team. They need to feel us. Festival day arrived and downtown Seattle buzzed like never before. Brightly lit stalls filled the air with the aroma of food and the crisp air. Hearth and Honor's booth was small but cozy, with a wooden sign and potted plants as decor. Across from us, a few stalls down, was Garnett's Table, its flashy sign advertising $10 seafood combos. I saw Ben there in a pristine suit, directing his staff like a general. He glanced at me, smirking, but I didn't respond. I focused on my team: Monica cooking soup, Lisa serving, Miguel baking, and Ethan running support. We're here for quality, I reminded them. Let the food speak for us. The crowd started pouring in. Our booth quickly became packed. Customers lined up, curious about the seafood soup bloggers had raved about. Lisa shared Joe's story about his early mornings fishing in the fog, and diners listened, their eyes lighting up. A food critic who had written about Garnett's Table when I was there tasted the salmon and nodded. This is Seattle on a plate. I stood behind the kitchen, hands trembling with excitement but staying calm, overseeing every dish served. In contrast, Garnett's Table's booth was quiet. I saw customers try their fried fish sandwiches, then shake their heads and walk away. One said loudly enough for me to hear, "This is no different from street corner fast food." Ben kept smiling, handing out free samples to draw people in, but his eyes betrayed uncertainty. I didn't gloat. I focused on my work. But when the festival judges came by, I knew this was the defining moment. The judges stopped at our booth, tasting each dish. I personally served the apple tart, sharing the story of Skagit apples and my grandfather's cinnamon ice cream recipe. They nodded, taking notes. As they left, one judge turned back. "You remind me of Garnett's Table in its prime." The words were a bittersweet stab. I glanced at Ben's booth, where he was arguing with his staff, and knew we were ahead. At the end of the day, the organizers announced the awards. Hearth and Honor was named Best Booth. The crowd cheered. My team erupted in joy. Monica hugged me tightly, and Tom shouted, "We did it, Theo!" An article in the Seattle Times appeared that night titled, "The Forgotten Son is the True Soul of the Garnett Culinary Legacy." I read it, my heart racing, not because of the victory, but because for the first time I felt recognized. Not as a chef, but as Theodore Garnett, who had risen from the ashes. The win at the Seattle Food and Wine Festival fanned the flames of Hearth and Honor's reputation. Customers flooded in, tables booked solid for weeks. Food bloggers and critics kept mentioning us, and an Eater article called Hearth and Honor, Seattle's must-try restaurant. I stood in the kitchen watching my team work in harmony, Monica stirring soup, Lisa sharing stories, Miguel baking bread, Ethan running tables, and felt my dream coming to life. But deep inside, I carried a scar, my family's favoritism, the years of being undervalued. While Hearth and Honor soared, Garnett's Table continued to sink. I heard they closed 2 more branches, one in Bellevue, one downtown. Yelp reviews grew worse. Bland food, poor service, not the Garnett's Table of old. One morning, Joe called, "Theo, their Pike Place branch is empty as a supermarket parking lot at midnight. Ben's in deep trouble." I nodded over the phone, saying nothing, but my heart was heavy. I didn't want Garnett's Table to collapse. It was my grandfather's legacy. But I couldn't forgive what they'd done to me. Then one day, my mother called. Her voice trembled, lacking its usual confidence. "Theo, can you meet me? Just for a bit." I hesitated but agreed. We met at a small coffee shop near Hearth and Honor. When I walked in, I saw her sitting in the corner with my father and Ben. Ben kept his head down, no longer sporting his smug smile. My father looked at me, his eyes weary. "Theo," my mother began, "Garnett's Table is struggling. Revenue's down, customers are leaving, contracts are canceled. We need you to come back. To save the family brand." I sat there feeling like time had stopped. Come back? After everything they'd done? I looked at Ben, waiting for him to speak. Finally he did, his voice soft. I messed up. I thought I could do better, but I didn't expect it to get this bad. Maybe we could work together? Share leadership? I almost laughed, but not out of joy. Share leadership? After they demoted me to head chef? After Ben destroyed everything I built? I took a deep breath, looking them in the eyes. Dad, Mom, Ben, I said, my voice calm but sharp. I used to belong to Garnett's table. I gave it 10 years, my sweat, my tears, my dreams. But you chose Ben, his big vision. Now I have hearth and honor, and that's my home. My mother burst into tears. But Theo, it's the family legacy. I shook my head. The family legacy died when you undervalued me. Now I'm building my own. I stood up and left the coffee shop. Seattle's rain still fell, but I didn't feel weighed down. I returned to Hearth and Honor, where the team was prepping for the evening shift. Monica looked at me, concerned. You okay? I smiled. Better than ever. I knew refusing my family wasn't easy, but it was right. I was no longer the eldest son sacrificing for others. I was Theodore Garnett, and I had found my path. The victory at the Seattle Food and Wine Festival was like a gust of wind fanning the flames of Hearth and Honor's reputation. Customers began flocking in, not just from Seattle, but from Portland, Vancouver, and even California. Tables were booked solid for a month, and I had to hire 2 more servers to keep up with demand. But the greatest success came from an unexpected source: the Westin Hotel Seattle. After canceling their contract with Garnett's Table, they reached out to me. I remember the morning I received an email from Westin's culinary director, the same one I'd convinced with my slow-roasted salmon. Theo, he wrote, we've heard about Hearth and Honor. We want to work with you. I read the email, my hands trembling with excitement. This was the contract I'd lost, the one Ben had destroyed, and now it was back. Not for Garnett's Table, but for me. I met the Westin director at Hearth and Honor, serving our seafood soup and salmon for them to try again. This is the quality we're looking for, he said, nodding in approval. A new $2 million contract was signed that week. When I told the team, Monica cheered and hugged me tightly. Boss, we did it. Tom clapped my shoulder. This is yours, no one else's. I smiled, my eyes stinging. For the first time, I felt recognized, not as a chef, but as the creator of Hearth and Honor. Success wasn't just about numbers, it was in the small moments. One evening, Helen, a regular from the Garnett's Table days, brought her whole family. Theo, you make me proud, she said, holding my hand. This is where I want my grandkids to grow up, knowing what real food is. I looked at the children around the table, laughing as they tasted the vanilla pudding, and felt like I was carrying on my grandfather's legacy. Not Garnett's Table, but the spirit he instilled, doing everything with heart. My team became a true family. Monica, now head sous chef, started creating new dishes like a zucchini salad with passion fruit dressing that customers loved. Miguel, once a dishwasher, now stood at the oven baking sourdough bread that left diners raving. Lisa, no longer shy, confidently led the serving team, telling ingredient stories like an artist. Ethan, the former intern, became an assistant manager, handling reservations and marketing with a passion I'd never seen. Theo, I want Hearth and Honor to be legendary, he said, and I believed him. Naomi, our investor, visited monthly. One time she sat at the corner table ordering the salmon and apple tart. Theo, I've invested in many restaurants, she said, but none have the soul of this place. You've done something special. Start thinking about the next locations. I nodded, filled with pride. Hearth and Honor wasn't just a restaurant. It was proof that quality and honor could triumph even when you're underestimated. But I didn't forget the past. Every time I looked at my grandfather's photo hanging in the kitchen, I remembered my days at Garnett's Table, the sleepless nights over bills, the times my parents dismissed me. I didn't hate them, but I couldn't forget. I had built hearth and honor from my own ashes, and that was my greatest victory. While hearth and honor rose like an unquenchable flame, Garnett's table continued to fade. I heard they'd closed most of their branches, leaving only the main downtown Seattle location, but even that was nearly empty. Yelp reviews were scathing: bland food, unenthusiastic staff. An Eater article wrote, "Garnett's table, once a Seattle icon, is now a shadow of itself." I read it, torn between regret and liberation. It was my grandfather's legacy, but also the place that had buried my dreams. My parents began to see their mistake. One morning my mother called, her voice choked. "Son, I'm sorry. Your father and I were wrong to favor Ben. We didn't see what you did." I stayed silent, letting her continue. "Can you forgive us?" I took a deep breath, looking out my apartment window at the falling Seattle rain. "Mom, I don't hate you, but I can't go back. Hearth and honor is where I belong." She cried over the phone, but I didn't waver. Forgiveness was one thing, trust was another. Ben reached out too, with a short text. "Theo, I know I messed up. Can we meet?" I agreed, but not for reconciliation. We met at a small bar in Capitol Hill. Ben no longer wore a pristine suit or his smug smile. He looked exhausted, with dark circles under his eyes. "I thought I could do better than you," he said softly. "But I ruined everything." I looked at him, not with anger, but with distance. "Ben, I didn't build hearth and honor to prove I'm better than you. I built it because I believe in it." He nodded, saying nothing more, and I knew we'd never be close like before. That fall, the Hearth and Honor was invited to the Pacific Northwest Culinary Awards. I stood on stage before hundreds, accepting the Best Restaurant Award. My team, Monica, Tom, Lisa, Miguel, Ethan, stood behind me, cheering. I held the microphone, looked out at the audience, and said, "Sometimes being underestimated is the best thing. It forces you to prove your worth, not with words, but with results." The crowd applauded, but I wasn't speaking for them. I spoke for myself, for the years of being overlooked, for the fire I'd rekindled. The lingering question remained: should I forgive and reconcile with my family? Part of me wanted to heal, for they were my blood, for the memories of childhood days when Ben and I played on the beach. But the larger part, the one that built Hearth and Honor from ashes, told me to hold my boundaries. My family had chosen their path, and I had chosen mine. I no longer needed their validation. I had my team, my customers, and myself. Every night as I closed Hearth and Honor, I stood in the kitchen watching the fire in the oven die down. I thought of my grandfather, his words, "See it through, son." I had done it, not for Garnett's table, but for Hearth and Honor, for my own fire and honor. The Seattle rain fell outside, but in my heart there was only light.